In this interview, we will discuss sexual harassment. If at any time you need to excuse yourself, please feel free to do so. In addition, there will be PAC counselors and admin here to process with you at any time during the school year. Hi everybody, my name is Olivia Moody, and this is a special edition of First Take, where Leah Murgatroyd and I interview Mr. Lee and Miss Green surrounding an email that was sent to the community a few weeks ago. Mr. Lee, on Friday, January 31st, you sent an email to both the students and the parents at SAS to discuss the sending of non-consensual intimate images. We know that this is not an issue that is unusual for high school students all around the world, but why are we addressing this now?
It's a good question, Olivia. And first of all, just thank you both for taking the time to have this important conversation. You're right. This is not an issue that is unique to our school. And at the same time, it's one that we, I think, as a community, not just Ms. Green and Mr. Lee, but we as a community have to take really seriously. And why? I think first and foremost, harm is being done to real people, to real students. And it runs counter to everything that we believe in as a community. So that, I think, is the first piece. I'm sorry that it's taken this long for us to actually talk about it. So I apologize that we have not raised this sooner, okay? At the same time, I'm glad we're talking about it now because it's gone undiscussed for far too long. The other piece of the context, which people are aware of at this point because of the letter, is that there have been some legal changes in the country in which we live, right? And legal changes that I think put these kinds of choices in a different category than they were in the year 2019. There have been some new laws that have gone into effect in the year 2020, and I think as informed citizens of this country, we should understand those laws. So those are some of the reasons to have the conversation now.
Mr. Lee, was there a specific event that actually caused this interview to need to take place now?
With regard to situations where specific students are receiving support, or specific students have made choices that resulted in disciplinary consequences, there's a limit to how much detail I'm able to share, okay? So I'll start by saying that. And the second thing I want to say is, there wasn't one event, but what has come to my attention is that there is a trend of students at SAS non-consensually distributing images of other students, and I know that's happening. And I know it's happening not once, not twice, not three, multiple times. So the point at which that pattern became clear was the point at which we as educators said, it's now time for us to talk about this. So I hope that that answers the question, but it has to do with a pattern of real events.
So, Ms. Green, the letter's first point actually discussed that students need to know that they will actually be supported when they come forward or when they feel as though they'd like to come forward for their friends. And how can you ensure that the students who come forward will feel that they were not targeted and do not get a sort of retribution for coming forward?
So I want to start off by saying that every student who comes through these gates should feel that they are safe, that they are supported, and that they're protected. And because this issue is so challenging and so serious and so sensitive, it's really important for people to feel like they have the opportunity to come forward if they'd like to. Myself and every other administrator, as well as any other adult, is available and willing to engage in these conversations, not to mention PAC counselors who are, trained and proficient in having these kinds of discussions. But in terms of going back to that idea about protection, I want to stress that anyone who comes into my office for any conversation should come in knowing that there will be confidentiality, right? I will only use names in context where it is absolutely necessary with colleagues. I would never mention the name of a student to another student or to their parents. So in that regard, your privacy would most certainly be protected, and I am completely committed to that. In terms of retribution, I think that's the word you used, that actually even makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, because I think it's important to note that any any action, whether it's intended to harm, to bully, to intimidate, would be dealt with swiftly and directly, and it would be treated as a completely different infraction than the initial, right? Because, as I said before, everyone in this community has the right to feel safe and supported and protected, and so I just want to make sure that that's clearly articulated.
Will there be an opportunity for students to report these things anonymously if they feel as though they're affected?
That's really challenging, right? Because it doesn't allow us to properly understand where and why this is coming up. And I recognize that, there's some people who don't necessarily feel comfortable walking into the office. And so there's some options around that. You could go to your PAC counselor and air the issue with them and talk to them and get their perspective. Or another alternative is that they could send an email to me or Mr. Lee and just say, here are some things that are on my mind and I just wanted you to know. Another way that could be followed up is that they could then set up an appointment before, after school, whenever is convenient to them.
Right.
Again, it is our priority to honor the privacy and confidentiality of students who want to talk.
This word has come up before in conversations that our community has had, and I'm going to bring it up now. Okay, so the word is snitching. There's nothing cowardly about coming forward to let somebody know that you are being harmed or that somebody you care about is being harmed. Normally when people talk about snitching, I'm telling somebody something because I want somebody to get in trouble. That's actually not what we're talking about right here. What we're talking about is people who have the courage to do the right thing and to seek help when they need it. To me, that's wise. That's not cowardly in any fashion. So what I would rather that students talk about, rather than retribution, rather than who told who what, is how do I support the people who are vulnerable?
In helping us sort of understand the seriousness of the issue, can you please tell us what the law says about the distribution of these images and what it would entail for a student who may be involved in the distribution of any of these images or videos?
Absolutely. And thank you for the question, because I think the legal context matters, and the legal context has changed. Before I read the law, and I actually want to read it word for word, so I hope that's okay, I actually want to emphasize the point that from my view, this is about morals more than law, right? So this is about what kind of person you want to be and what kind of person you believe you should be, more than the government is telling me I need to not do or to do certain things.
Right.
So I want to emphasize that, and at the same time, yes, we need to understand the law. So this is a law that went into effect on January 1st, 2020. Actions that are classified as crimes under this law would not have been classified as crimes during the 2019 calendar year. Okay? So here's what the law says. Any person A shall be guilty of an offense who intentionally or knowingly distributes or threatens the distribution of an intimate image or recording of another person B, who does this without B's consent to the distribution, and who knows or has reason to believe that the distribution will or is likely to cause B, humiliation, alarm, or distress. What we're talking about here, people who think, hey, this person sent me an image, and now I think it would be funny, or maybe it'd be cool for me to show this image to somebody else, and I'm doing it without that person's consent. Singapore is actually saying that is harmful enough that it should be categorized as a crime. And I agree. Here are the consequences from a legal standpoint. So a person who is guilty of an offense shall on conviction be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 5 years, or with a fine, or with caning, or with any combination of such punishments. Now there's another clause here which I want to just emphasize, because I think for middle school and high school students it's a clause that actually it has some relevance. So the law continues and says, a person who commits an offense against a person who is below 14 years of age shall on conviction be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 5 years, and shall also be liable to fine or to caning. So I emphasize the conjunctions as I read this law because I think they're important. In the first instance, if we're talking about an image of somebody who is not below 14 years of age, the conjunction being used is or. Any of these consequences could be a legal consequence. In the second clause, where we're dealing with an image that is of somebody who is below 14 years of age, it uses a conjunction and. From my interpretation of this means imprisonment is going to be a consequence. And some of these other things may apply as well. My intention today, just to be clear, is not to scare anyone. Our job, I think, as educators is to give information to young people and to parents and to say, if you didn't know, you really need to know.
Ms. Green, in the work that you've done with students, can you talk a little bit about the social and emotional effects of students that are impacted by the distribution of photos?
I think there's been a range of responses, as there would be with any situation. Everything from feeling isolated to mental health conditions and physical and social harm that come to people who are featured in these images. The students that I've spoken to, the thread that they have in common is that they are all resilient. They have, through processing with friends and trusted adults, have gotten to the place where they have moved from feeling shamed and isolated in some instances to feeling as though they can walk through the CAF and not worry as much. That there was a period of time when they were first released that they felt like everyone was talking about them, or they were receiving text messages or emails, and they felt really vulnerable, but now have gotten to a place where they feel like they can take back a bit of space and occupy that space with pride. There's the human component, right? Sharing these photos causes harm, right? And so I suppose there's another thing that I feel like is really important in the context of this discussion is distinguishing between senders and transmitters, right? A sender is someone who sends a picture consensually to someone else, as opposed to a transmitter who then transmits the photo non-consensually to other folks. We have to be really thoughtful about how senders are treated in the context of our community. And again, I go back to that safe, supported, and protected.
Because we've talked a lot about the distribution of these intimate images or videos, whatever they may be, on whatever platform. But in saying that, what would you actually suggest that a student do if they were to receive one of these images, whether consensually or non-consensually?
I think that's a really important question, Liam, because I know this happens. You didn't ask for an image to be sent to you.
Right.
And then somebody sent you something. What I would say to folks who are receiving images is this. Very simply, please delete them immediately, and then please go on written record. Even if it's as simple as, I deleted it, I replied in the message thread, hey, like, I'm not good with this. Like, please just don't send me things like this anymore. I don't want to see this. What that does is it then puts the recipient in a position where it is very clear they've indicated their disagreement with this entire situation.
It's also important to delete those images as soon as you get them, because even the possession of them causes harm. Remove any opportunity for anyone else to view them, for them to be shared, for anything to happen. Just delete them.
But then I think, again, just almost to speak on behalf, I think, of some of the students, even when they get these photos and then they delete them, if they've done the right thing, they still feel as though if they've deleted it and it's out of their mind at this point. And do you think that students who have deleted them and feel as though, you know, they still feel vulnerable, or they still feel as though they would like to talk to someone but they don't know who they would like to talk to, you guys are still open to
That's a
talking to
great
them?
point, because it's not just the people featured who are victims of this, right? It's the people who are in possession, the people who've seen. Everyone is affected by the experience of witnessing this kind of harm. And I think anyone who has any concerns as it relates to this issue should feel free to find a trusted adult. It requires processing. It's not natural and it's not normal. It's something that takes some working through, as you highlighted, and so I think it's really important that you brought that up.
I agree.
We talked a little bit about retribution earlier. What are the school consequences that a student would face if they were found to be either a transmitter or someone that viewed this and didn't delete it immediately of non-consensual photos?
Yeah. So we take every situation that comes through our office on a case-by-case basis, recognizing that our realm of discipline exists within the context of the high school handbook, which I know all of you have read and know cover to cover. But every situation is going to be different, right? So the person who has a photo would be treated differently than the person who's sold photos, would be treated differently than the person who lied about and we found out otherwise.
We issue consequences because we want to signal to students that they need to pause for a second and reflect on a choice that they made. Typically, the severity of the consequence should be tightly linked with the severity of the choice, and tightly linked with the harm that it does to our community and how concerned we are about the harm that it would do to our community. So we've already discussed the impact of these kinds of choices on real people. The impact is significant, potentially significant. So the consequences therefore have to be significant. And actually, out of school suspension, pre-expulsion, expulsion, all of those things are scary to students because of the impact on school now and maybe on the impact on school later on in life. But they actually pale in comparison to the legal consequences. If this was a pattern for you, this is an opportunity for you to interrupt that pattern. So I just wanted to put that out there, that in all of these things, we really try to come at this from a place of care. And I know it's not always received that way, but that's really where all of our work around discipline comes from.
What should students do if they would like to give some support to friends they feel that their friends are vulnerable? What actions should they take?
Recognizing that each student has a different relationship with their family.
Yep.
To the extent that you can talk to parents about this, I think that that's a really important and worthwhile step. As Ms. Green has already said, I think it's really important to look for other trusted adults. And whether that is a teacher, counselor, administrator, coach, I think that that's incredibly valuable. With regard to friends, it's in some ways it's even more complex when you have a friend who's struggling. Coach the friend around how they could have a conversation with the people that they need to have a conversation with. And then ultimately, hopefully, that friend feels comfortable bringing their concerns directly to somebody. The one thing I would add on to that, though, is if you have a concern that your friend might come into harm, right? Like this is affecting them to such a degree that you're actually worried about their safety, then I think it's really important that you then take the step of bringing it to the attention of somebody who can help. And that's really hard. I just have to recognize how hard that is. Maybe the first reaction of the friend will be, how could you have done that? Like, you weren't supposed to tell him. But over time, in all of the instances where I have seen that have to happen, the friend has come around and said, I know you did it because you cared. Ms. Green?
I would also add that I hope that every student has a trusted adult within the context of the community and certainly in their life that they could reach out to with this situation. But I also want to recognize that perhaps that's not the case, and bring awareness to the two groups that Mr. Lee talked about in his letter. They are SAC and AWARE. They're two external organizations that provide hotlines as well as resources for folks who are struggling with issues as it pertains to the transmission of intimate images. And so I think it's also really important that people know that there are internal and also external resources that are available to them.
As we come to the end of this interview, we just want to ask both of you, what do you hope that students get out of what we've discussed here today and the email that was sent out a few weeks ago?
You want to start, Ms. Green?
Sure. When I think about the entirety of this conversation, I think about how complex and nuanced this is, and every situation is going to be different. And so I want to acknowledge that we couldn't cover everything and talk about all the variations and all the rights and wrongs and ins and outs of everything. And so I want to acknowledge that first. Next, I'd like to just say, again, I am really committed to supporting folks around this issue, whether they want to come in as a friend just to give hypothetical situations, or if an individual wants to come in and say, hey, this has happened to me, or I've participated in this or that. So for me, central to all of this is support, and I think that's really, really important. Second, again, I know I've said this a few times now, but urging anyone who is in possession of any image to delete it as soon as possible. And I think finally, to just let the community know that this is something we care deeply about. Stay tuned, because there's going to be seminars coming down the pipeline. There'll be parent workshops, so we can keep this conversation going, because we know it's not just a one-off, and we know that there are many sides to this very complicated issue. And so we want to make sure that there's space for continued discussion and learning.
Ms. Green is somebody who cares extraordinarily deeply about students, and somebody who I know is committed to doing the right thing. She talks about safe, positive communities. Those aren't just words to her or to us. Like, that's why we're having this conversation now. So that's maybe the first thing I wanted to say. I want to encourage the many, 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 many students who are doing the right thing every single day to keep it up. We have to talk about choices that are harmful to our community. When we let those things go undiscussed, it doesn't benefit anybody. Please continue to support your peers. Please continue to use your voice to help to raise awareness around this issue, and to continue to indicate that this isn't a small thing. You know, it might be something that's affecting a lot of school communities, but it's not a small thing here. It's something you care about. It's something we care about. And I think the more that we use our voices collectively in that way, the better off we're going to be as a school. So that's all I wanted to add. And maybe I'll just end with, once again, thank you so very much for this time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee, for being here, and you, Ms. Green, as well. At this point, we encourage you to give some feedback in advisory, and please, I can't stress this enough, we encourage you to ask questions. We encourage you to have a conversation with your advisory about anything that you may feel. This conversation does not end here. It continues with you. Thank you. We'll see you next time on First Take.